You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Christopher Media, let's make some noise.
It was like I caught a skating fever or something. You know, I didn't even come home that night. I sat there amazed by all the skaters and all the music and all the power and all the energy in the rink. And the next morning I went and bought me some skates, and I've been skating ever since. I go into a fit. And I'm going to be, if anything, the Muhammad Ali of roller skating. Maybe some way, somehow, that I can just skate my way out of Bedford-Stuyvesant.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Leon Chase.
Hey, Mike. It's great to be back.
Also joining me in the booth this week is Mr. Benjamin Buxton.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me here.
This week we're discussing the 1980 film from director Terrance Mitchell, Get Rollin'. It's the story of three very colorful people and their lives in and around a roller rink in Brooklyn. There's Vinzerrelli, who also goes by Jigaboo Jones, Pat the Cat, and Inez Davis. This is a movie that I had heard about and read about for years until it finally escaped and was uploaded briefly to YouTube. It may still be out there somewhere, but not by the same person who uploaded a few years ago when I finally found it. That said, I'm not sure if I should give a spoiler warning or not because I don't think many folks have seen this beforehand. Likewise, I'm not going to ask either of my co-hosts this week when they first saw the movie because I'm pretty sure neither of you guys saw this before I asked you to be on this episode, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
I am actually really glad that you invited me on this episode because I had a chance to see this movie a couple of years ago in Los Angeles. There was like a rare 16 millimeter screening of this film at a place called Cinefamily in Los Angeles, and they had the director there in person. But I was like working that night and I missed it, so I was really bummed I never got to see it until now.
What did you think of the movie?
Initial impressions were I just loved how I felt so engrossed on the rink culture. I mean, the movie does this amazing job of just kind of oscillating between the world of the lives of these characters and then just the total energy of what's happening on the rink. So I love how sucked into that world I was able to get and almost get hypnotized before it kind of snapped out and said, no, there's these lives happening off the rink too.
Leon, how about you? What'd you think?
You never disappoint. It's not easy to surprise me these days with truly obscure new pop culture things, and you always deliver, so thank you. This is so up my alley on so many different levels. I mean, you know that I love the era. There's a couple great van shots, not to get ahead of ourselves here. Also, I am actually an occasional recreational roller skater. That's one of my current midlife crisis activities. And I'm also in Brooklyn, and I'm aware of what's left of that culture now. And also I'm aware of the Empire roller rink. And when I was doing my most recent documentary, I was researching the history of Empire and, actually got some great footage from a later time, but before the Empire closed in like the mid 2000s. So yeah, I mean, just to find out that there's a movie shot in 1979 set at Empire Rink in Brooklyn was, that was an easy sell. Let's put it that way.
I have tried to talk to J. Terrance Mitchell over the years. I talked with him briefly, gosh, I think it was probably like 5-6 years ago on LinkedIn. Of all places, I found him on LinkedIn and was trying to talk him into coming on the show, doing an interview, those kind of things. But he did send me some press releases, those kind of things from the time. And I was just amazed at how big this movie was at the time, that it got 7 mentions in the New York Times, that it was mentioned in quite a few national newspapers, that it ended up being one of the top 10 films that the New York Times had in 1980. That's absolutely crazy. And I'm curious if we will ever see a legitimate release of this thing, because it is wall-to-wall needle drops of some great, great songs. And from the beginning, from the opening shot, where you get these 2 little lights off in the distance, and they start playing Dance With Me. And as soon as the music starts, I'm like, oh my God, I know this song. This is amazing that they had this in here. But every song in this movie is something that you know, and something that I imagine these days would be really cost prohibitive to put out for like such a small, I mean, the target audience for this film today, I can't imagine what it was. Probably in 1980, a little bit broader of an audience. But right now, I think I'm talking to 2 of the people that might have been interested in this thing in 2019.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, you know, I've made a film also that includes like some music from like a live space like that. And the hope as a director is that you can always like claim fair use, because that's just in the space and that is naturally what's happening in the environment. But it becomes pretty obvious fairly quickly in this film that sync sound was definitely an issue. I mean, they're just out there on the rink and they're just like playing over this soundtrack and kind of like cueing in these different sound effects from the skates. So that soundtrack quality definitely like is obviously a huge challenge and is kind of beyond us in this age of lawsuits.
Do you think that they just ignored the legalities at the time, or do you think it was just much easier to include popular music back then?
I'm very curious what they ended up doing, because they have music credits at the end of the movie, so it seems like it's legit, but I'm not sure. But then there's always the whole thing of you have rights for film, and now this is, you know, home video was just in its infancy at this point, really didn't take off to the mainstream until mid 80s. So at this point, nobody's thinking about home video releases. So you probably just had rights for a theatrical run, maybe, you know, a limited theatrical run. And after that, that's, you know, game's over. So I think you would have to relicense everything if you're going to ever put this out on any sort of home video format. Because it's not a documentary. Like, at first I thought this was a documentary, because after this opening shot where it's amazing, it's the 2 lights that I talked about in the distance end up being lights that are on roller skates, and it takes up the whole opening credits, really just gorgeous. And then we get introduced to Vinzerrelli, and we get a really nice interview with him. He's getting his hair done. He's talking about how roller skating has changed his life.
Well, I realized right away I wanted to create an image. I wanted to create a character which would attract people to me. And I wanted to create a character that would be very, very advantageous to the place, but also non-threatening, which is how Vinzerrelli Jigaboo came up. Jigaboo Jammers came up. It was a funny name, a name that fit into Brooklyn, a name that was very uninhibited, a name that was to a lot of people very comical. Nevertheless, when you can make somebody smile or make somebody laugh, then you make somebody be in a non-threatening situation. So I created the character, but then I realized, but I can't skate. So I had to get good.
After that, we get introduced to this guy named Pat the Cat, but it is very quickly thereafter when you start to see that they are actually not doing a documentary, that this is kind of a docudrama, I suppose, where parts of it seem like they're documentary and then other parts are obviously staged, and we're doing shot reverse shot of Pat talking with his manager, and Pat has this whole dream that he's going to, I guess, go to England and become a world famous roller skater in England, and that becomes kind of the thrust of the movie. And I had no idea that he and Vinzerrelli were partners until right towards the end of the movie. I felt like I missed a whole lot of stuff because you were talking about sync sound. I was having a lot of trouble kind of understanding some of the dialogue when they were having these more narrative moments.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. There was a New Yorker article that talked about how those departures into fiction were sort of miscues. And the New Yorker article was very critical of the film, saying that like it was unfortunate that it got bogged down with all these departures. But I kind of disagreed with that. I think that is like a very natural move in my mind to the sort of energy that you encounter in those environments. I mean, people are there skating, they're being very expressive, and they're talking about their dreams. They're talking about their hopes and their desires. So I think if this filmmaker had any sort of like close contact with these characters, which it seems like he did, it seems natural to me that they would come up with this idea that like, yeah, let's like do a film that highlights and showcases the performance, but let's take it a step further. Let's make it more than that, because this is such a vehicle for self-expression and self-creation. It's a launching point for a lot of other ideas.
Yeah, this idea of mixing documentary with fiction, I mean, it's been around pretty much since cinema began, and I really picked up on the use of that in things like Eastern European cinema, like stuff that Foreman was doing with Loves of a Blonde and The Fireman's Ball, or Makoveyev with Man is Not a Bird, where you're mixing real-life characters with a narrative that's going on. I'm not sure exactly how successful it is in this film, but I do really root for these guys, and I root for Pat the Cat. It feels like at the end of the day, this is Pat the Cat's movie, that he is the one who is doing the majority of the narrative work when it comes to this. And to that end, it kind of reminds me of other things that were happening around this time, things like Saturday Night Fever. I think Fame was a couple years after this, but it has that kind of hard scrabble, I want to get out from under kind of an attitude. I don't know if it was just the New York setting or that it was something to do with the dance or entertainment world. But these guys, I mean, I felt really bad for Pat the Cat when he quits his job, goes down for an audition, is giving it his all, auditioning for this one white guy, and then the guy disappears. And you just feel like, oh my God, he just wasted his chance, and he quit his job, and now his wife's going to have his ass.
I'm probably closer in opinion to the New Yorker, that I think definitely the weakest part of this movie is when they try to go into what's obviously the improvised docudrama portions. And maybe if they'd pull it off a little more efficiently, it would be less awkward to me. But a lot of it is like sitting through like an improv 101 class. And, there's parts of particularly the wife where I think she did a really good job. But a lot of like, I think in general, they could have eliminated that and gone a little more into just who these guys were. And I still would have been completely interested. As soon as I realize that there are fictional elements, then I start wondering, well, how much is fictional? Is that woman really his wife? It personally just, it throws me off a little bit. And I'm not as big a fan of Pat the Cat, but I'm sure we'll get into that.
I really like Inez, but she's only on screen for just a few minutes. And it's like, I really wanted this to be a three-legged stool, but she's just barely there. And we see her, roller skating, kind of doing her thing. And I didn't even realize that it was the same woman the first time that I watched it, that we go from her skating to her I guess she's in Central Park, and she's helping out the guy who has a wooden leg and no right arm. And that was one of the best moments of the movie. And I was like, I want more of that, please. And I don't even think she comes back ever.
She was really interesting, not only as a woman in that scene, but also that she had this life that seemed like pretty serious and probably very stressful. She was doing, I don't remember the specifics of it, but she's basically doing like social work or medical care or something like that. And then doing things like teaching this guy, like you said, I think it's one of the best scenes is just seeing this guy with one leg, and also a 1979 version of one leg, which I'm sure was not very complex. And she's teaching this guy to skate. And I was like, yeah, I'd like to see more of her. Like, what else is she doing? Is this what her week is like?
That scene really was utterly compelling. I mean, it was just such a reprieve from like all of the pandemonium that had been going on previous to that. And obviously like the energy of the rink coming out. And so to just see them like quietly in the park and like him relying so heavily on her was definitely beautiful and like so poignant. And I agree, like I could have used more moments of that, but at the same time, I'm a little bit forgiving. And then I feel like it's just like a nice, tiny kind of like golden moment that you get in the middle of the movie.
I really tried to put on my detective hat with this movie quite a bit, and because the gentleman that we were talking about with the prosthetic leg and no arm, he says to Inez at one point, "I saw you on 2020 and you didn't look nervous." And I was just like, oh, well, that's cool. Why was she on 2020? So I was trying to look into old episodes of 2020, like around 1980, 1979. I couldn't necessarily find anything, and all of these people in their IMDb credits, they're just, here's one thing that they did. I think Vinzerrelli might have one other credit, but that's about it. And so a lot of this led me into diving into newspaper archives. I found a nice article by about Vinzerrelli from '78, where he was talking about the Jigaboo Jammers and his skate crew and all this. And again, I felt like I really wanted to know more about this guy. And we had that one great interview that they cut back to a few times where he's getting his hair done. And there's moments of him playing the sax, things like that. But I'm like, man, I really just sit this guy down. I want to hear more about him. I want to see more of him actually skating, because I didn't feel like I saw a whole lot of him skating. We get to see some good Pat the Cat skating, but I really wanted to see more of all three of these people just enjoying themselves on that rink.
Part of me wonders, though, if there was some sort of hesitation or self-consciousness on the part of the filmmakers and the creative team behind it to think that, like, they were just making a documentary film. And maybe there was some hesitation around that because, like, the sort of cinema verite style of that time was still pretty ill-defined, I guess. And so I wonder if there was, like, a need to, like, let's make this a fiction film because that'll be taken more seriously. Yeah, like, it's maybe a little bit ill-thought out, but I don't know. I could see them having that conversation.
I loved Vinzerrelli, exactly for that reason. And, I think Benjamin's correct that there probably was, and I'm not sure that they had a sense of what their priority was when they started shooting this and, when the drama or whatever came in. But I just found Vinzerrelli fascinating because he's just so far out and so obviously a one of a kind character. And kind of wacky, he's got this amazing van. He's got this sort of Sun Ra thing while he's playing saxophone, just so far out and cool, but also incredibly conscious. And his conversations he just goes straight to very large issues about the community, has an incredibly, incisive opinion on, just where he fits in and the struggles of people from that community trying to, do business or, and otherwise, progress for themselves. And I thought he was just really eloquent and interesting on that front.
His custom van is so amazing. I could have just done with a documentary about that in itself.
Absolutely.
That mural just would not stop. And it's just show me more about this. I want to see everyday life in Vinzerrelli's world. And yeah, he just was just such a fascinating character. And then you get the moments where it's like Pat the Cat going to that pool hall and he's talking smack with those guys. I'm just like, what is going on? Why are you so angry at this one dude? I just did not pick up everything that was being laid down in this movie. So it was just making it a little confusing at times. And yeah, I kind of was more towards the show me more the documentary, but then I was pulling for these folks towards the end of the movie when Pat the Cat and Vinzerrelli, they're finally united, and there's that dude who's got kind of the Bob Keeshan mustache going on and the white man's afro kind of thing, and it's just okay, what is this guy going to screw them over? And then them and the limousine and everything, I was just oh wow, this is going to be great. They're going to go to England, and I guess they're going to start their roller disco careers in England. I don't know why it was such a dream to go to England either, but they really wanted to go there, man. It felt like, taking the bus down to Florida that, that they were doing a Midnight Cowboy or something. It's we're going to have our dreams fulfilled when we get to England.
I was definitely thrown off by that too. And that that man you're referring to with that mustache, he just kind of like appears in the film. The same way that the other man kind of disappears, this kind of guy just shows up. And it was kind of never defined who he was. I assume he's some kind of like talent manager who's like there to sign them potentially or something like that. But they're just like hanging out. And yeah, this like London as sort of this like symbol of making it, right? Like that if we can only get to London, we'll prove it. But then even that's kind of like detracted in that scene when they're sitting there being like, well, I don't want to just show up to London and not have any like game plan. Like if we show up to London, like how are we going to get back? Like then that became a further discussion. So it's really interesting to see like how even the fiction itself breaks down. And like you guys are saying, like clearly fairly improvised. So to see them mess around with that trope and maybe not necessarily know where it leads, obviously gives us even the end of the film.
It kind of makes me want to see what John Cassavetes would have done if he had been able to get Seymour Cassel and Peter Falk on roller skates. I just want to see that movie now.
I live in New York City, and, it's always fun to sit and watch movies, especially from past decades, and sort of spot places in the city. And the most infamous one being French Connection, which I'm sure you guys know, where they basically paid off a couple cops, didn't get the proper permits to shoot that legendary car chase scene under the tracks. And I thought of that because there's a moment toward the end where Pat the Cat is skating out of the Battery Tunnel in Brooklyn, which is also a very steep incline. That man is working incredibly hard in that scene. And I'm just watching that thinking, like, did they have the budget to shut this major tunnel down in New York? Or did they just like give the guy at the booth a 6-pack because it was 1979 and shot it in 10 minutes? Like, and then, there's a couple of those where he's like on 42nd Street in like really crazy places where you probably shouldn't be on roller skates. And I'm really curious to know like how they grab those shots.
There's that really awesome shot. Is he like going across a bridge or something? It seems like a bridge in the background, but I can't really tell. But it's like this huge structure. Okay, and he's coming towards the camera. That shot is just it is worth the price of admission alone.
Yeah, he's on the Brooklyn Bridge, which is also no joke because that is not very even pavement, and there's an incline there as well. So that man was definitely working for whatever they paid him in those scenes.
Going back to the idea of the fiction, though, like I basically agree with what's been said, that like it is clunky, and like the film probably would have been stronger if it was just focused on the documentary aspects of it. But that whole final sequence of Pat the Cat just racing across town, I think only works in a fiction film almost. I mean, I don't know. It would be interesting to see that in a documentary film of just like throwing in this person kind of having this like sporadic, almost fever dream because he's going like between traffic. He's coming like in and out of like the smoke. He's coming in and out of a tunnel and all alone in like the like biggest U.S. city. It's just crazy that they were able to pull that off. And so I guess the question I'm asking is like, would that be possible in a documentary film for that scene to have paid off in the same way?
The reality of someone actually doing that much skating anywhere, especially in a major city, is, you're right. If it was a documentary, if it was being sold to me as a straight documentary, I don't think I would really believe that was that guy's commute. So I think it's a really good example of where they were successful in obviously piecing together a little bit of fiction for us. But I think he sold that really well.
And I kind of like the way that it ends, too. The way that we have that freeze frame of him as he's getting onto the plane, and then it's like a clip of this inspirational speech that he's giving, and then the film ends. And I think that was the perfect place to end the movie, because we don't really know what the next step is for these guys, and they're not going to give us a title card to say what happened. Leaving us in suspense is probably the best thing that they could have done.
They really made the right choice in obviously keeping these guys' emotions and feelings, if that's the right word. As much fiction as they're obviously putting on top of the movie, like that sentiment from him at the end is obviously real. Like that speech is obviously heartfelt. Like these guys do have some sense of trying to make it or get out of whatever situation they're in or otherwise progress in life. And in particular, I mean, I just had some moments, especially when Vinzerrelli's getting really serious about it, where I'm just thinking, man, it's like 1979 and you're putting your money on Roller Boogie, and it's just, that's a tough one to watch.
Again, I think that is why I am such an advocate for the clunky fictional aspects of it, because if it had never gone to those depths, if it had never taken those side steps, rather, and was just purely documentary film, I don't think we actually get to take part in their sort of self-creation act. In other words, a documentary would be pure spectacle, whereas fiction, I feel like I'm actually getting kind of wrapped up in their process of self-creation, including the foibles. And so I think that final scene is a little bit more poignant because of that, because we have felt through the process of their self-creation, through this fiction documentary, the sadness and kind of the dark aspects of, again, putting your life in the hands of this spectacle that's kind of probably dying out. And it is now, and it probably was then.
On the subject of self-creation, I think you're right. And also that I was struck by the details of these guys' subculture, the idea that it wasn't just enough to go out and be a good skater. You also had to create a character, and you have to have a name, and you have to have a shirt with your name on it. And he never wears the same shirt twice. And it's, there's a huge emphasis on costumes and names and personas that's actually very reminiscent of other things like pro wrestling. Paris is Burning came to mind. I mean, though, obviously very different scenes at the time. And, just this idea, even roller derby or drag, they all have this thing of the costume and the persona. And I love that there's that aspect of these guys, that they are about this character and creating this particular image for themselves.
Yeah, this whole time we've been calling Pat Richardson Pat the Cat because that's what he's known as. He's got the shirt, he's got the cowboy hat, the 6-shooters, and the really cool red velvet looking skates. And personally, I love the look. I love what he's doing. I don't know if I would necessarily want him at my roller rink since he always seems to be kind of going against traffic and stuff, but the way he's dodging the other skaters. But it's okay, that's your thing, man.
First of all, I knew people who hung out at Empire Rink in its final days, early 2000s before it closed. And I'm pretty sure that Pat the Cat would not want to bring those fake pistols to the Empire circa 2000. That would not have ended well and probably would have caused a lot of other problems for him. But yeah, you're right. His whole thing about the dodging, I'm watching it going, I'm not sure how anybody else really feels about this guy in those moments.
Yeah, you guys have referenced some of the films that came to mind for you. One that came to mind for me was Gummo, the Harmony Korine film, because in that film, I think there is a real sense of play with iconography, having these children dress up in bunny costumes, and I think there also is cowboy costumes and just different things, and kind of playing in the trash that way. And there was something happening here, I think, with both of these characters, Pat the Cat and Vinzerrelli, where they are kind of playing with these icons. I mean, you talked about kind of the Sun Ra, sort of futurism that's going on with Vinzerrelli, but Pat the Cat just being dressed in this cowboy is just so stark. And then there's the one scene where he's in the room talking about the act he's going to put on in London, and he sort of does this almost gospel act. He's talking about that he's come to bring the people in London the gospel of roller skating, and he's doing it while wearing this cowboy hat. And so it's just this weird confluence of all these different American icons and subcultures, and I just think it created this very kind of surreal moment that didn't feel totally outside of history. It did feel correct to the idea of just kind of perhaps some of the racial divide that's going on and the idea of upward mobility within those communities. So I was kind of blown away by those characters because of that.
He has that kind of Bootsy Collins thing going on, but he's Vincent Vinzerrelli Brown. So if he drops the Vinzerrelli, he just becomes Vincent Brown and he can just go into the woodwork. I tried looking up this guy and good luck looking up Vincent Brown. Look up Vinzerrelli, you get a little bit more hits, though Google is trying to tell me that I'm actually looking for Fonzarelli the entire time.
I wanted to ask you this earlier when you were kind of talking about trying to get in contact with the director and finding his LinkedIn. Do we know what happened to him after this film? What has he been up to?
Yeah, that was one of the things that I really wanted to ask him, because it's just he's still around, and it seemed because there was a nice article about where he came from. He's actually a fellow Michigander and went to MSU before he ended up getting into documentaries and doing this stuff. So I knew a little bit of his background, but I wanted to know, what did this movie do? I mean, like I said, it was on the top 10 list of the New York Times best films for 1980. Did that open any doors for this guy? I'm really curious what happened afterwards, not just to Pat the Cat, Inez, and Vinzerrelli, but also with the director, with the producers, all of the people involved in this film.
Art mirrors life then, right? Because at the end of this film, we're left asking the same questions. Like, these guys are going to go off to London, and what's going to happen to them next?
It also strikes me as similar to a couple other movies that came out at the time that kind of became classics, but weren't huge commercially at the time. I'm thinking of Wild Style, if you know that movie. The director's name slips me. I'm sure your fans can help me out. And there was also a movie around the early 80s about graffiti writers where it was obviously real, but they were imposing stories on it a little bit. And, I'm curious if there was a sense that they thought this was going to, I don't know, be bigger financially, or, because you're right. You don't really hear about any of these people afterward.
Yeah, looking at his LinkedIn, he's got something called Mitchell Swan Entertainment from 2005 until now, so the last 14 years. I would like to know what's going on, Terrance Mitchell. And I have been writing to him for the last 6 months going, you want to be part of this? And I just never got any responses. So,
what's interesting is there's seems to be a resurgence of stuff on this subject matter, or maybe a new crop of things, because I'm thinking about United Skates, which is about to come out on HBO, which I believe is a documentary about something similar. And then obviously, I was really surprised to see what Benjamin made, his short film that was set in Chicago, I believe. And, I'm just curious, these things come back, and are we going to suddenly see more interest in this the way we've seen with, other things in the last couple of years? It would be really great to see this guy come back and sort of get his proper dues for a work like this,
Leon, I'm glad you brought that all up. You mentioned a couple times that you knew of this roller skating rink and that it closed down in the early 2000s. In kind of the research and what you saw around there, I mean, what did you see that was happening? I mean, is it just kind of the typical story of just it's a declining interest and people aren't as invested in it anymore, or was there more to the story of that roller skating rink?
Oh, I think there's a lot to that place. It was really the epicenter of a very serious and very vibrant culture. I mean, which I haven't really experienced too much, except, the people that are left from it now who still show up at the one place you can skate in New York. The biggest problem in New York is that everything is about real estate, and roller rinks just were not worth the amount of space and insurance and everything else they took up. So the two main roller rinks, which were in Brooklyn and the Bronx, all went away in the 2000s, mostly because of financial reasons. There were ongoing problems with crime. They were not in what would be considered super safe areas at the time. But there was a huge culture that, in my opinion, didn't really go away. I was very lucky when I was researching my own stuff. I found a man named Kappa Chris Robinson who had the foresight to just videotape all this stuff while it was still happening, up through when Empire closed in I think 2004. And I mean, it's just phenomenal. Not only the number of people, but an insane level of skill and tricks and style that are going on. And again, the costumes, the personas. My impression is that this scene was going strong and really up until they closed the rinks down.
Well, I do want to talk about Benjamin's film because I saw that last year at the Chicago Underground Film Festival. And as soon as I saw it, I was just like, I want to talk to this guy because that movie blew me away. And I know we ended up giving you some sort of an award for the movie. I can't remember which award it was because we had the cutesy names and stuff, so I apologize for that. But I mean, it was fantastic, and none of the judges could stop talking about that movie after we saw it the first time.
Oh, well, thanks a lot. Yeah, it was it was the Made in Chicago award.
Because you captured the spirit and just that slice of life. And I mean, just for folks who haven't seen it yet, could you describe what goes on in your film?
Yeah, so it's a short documentary, and what I attempted to do in it is just sort of give a viewer the experience of kind of entering into this atmosphere and the personalities and styles and character that just comes out of it. So the site that I filmed is called The Rink. It's in South Side Chicago, and it's one of the longest operating roller rinks in Chicago. It's been open since the 70s, and so the people who skate there have been going there since the 70s and are now in their like 60s and 70s, and even some of them in their 80s. So it's just this like large, very close-knit, tight-knit community that have created this style over decades, and it's all very unique to Chicago. So that was something standing out to me watching this film, is how distinct the style in Chicago was versus the style in New York. So, yeah, the film just attempts to sort of like give a sample of the type of energy and character and personality that comes out, rather than get into the history of it necessarily. It just is interested in the characters in their daily lives.
And I should probably say the name of the movie is On the Rink. And the other thing that I liked about it so much was just that it's this, like I said, slice of life, and it seems to be that the roller rink is so much more than roller skating. It's this place for socialization. It's this place where you get to hear these different stories, and that you take the time to talk to these folks is fantastic. And that everybody seemed so comfortable with you. And I'm very curious, how did you kind of embed yourself as a journalist to make people feel that they could open up to you so much?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I just showed up because I had previously, when I was in high school, I worked at a roller skating rink, but I was in Utah. And in Utah, we have no style whatsoever for roller skating. And so whenever I move to a new city, I'm just kind of curious about what the roller skating rinks are like. So I found this one and just showed up and kind of got to know a couple of the people there. And there was a man who's featured in my film. His name is Calvin Small, and he's like just a professional. He's a wizard on his skates, and he really opened up the place to me. He was very encouraging. He was very happy to see the skating get sort of some exposure, and so he introduced me to a lot of people. And again, my project was to just get to know people and have them talk about their daily lives, rather than have them in a journalistic style tell me the story of their skating or why they were there. It was just like, no, when you show up and you've been going there for 40 years, you're not constantly talking about the history of the place. You're talking about what you did that week. You're talking about your job. You're talking about your family. And so I just wanted to highlight those aspects of it, which felt far more naturalistic than trying to do some sort of expository look at it. Because there's been a lot of coverage on that. You can go and WBEZ even just released a little video, but it's just very cold. So when you watch those videos, you don't really want to be there. It just sounds like a report on a dying hobby. And instead, I wanted to show why this hobby was ever alive in the first place.
Yeah, that one of my favorite things about that movie you made is precisely for that reason, that you are showing real, actual people participating in a culture right now. And I think when we see things like this, particularly where people of color are concerned, I think it's important to remind ourselves that scenes like this aren't just dead and preserved in amber for us to study. They stuck around. These people had lives. Things move on. Maybe they get smaller. Maybe they get bigger, but they are still happening. And I think anything that highlights these cultures and, looks into them and shows people what they are from a human standpoint, and not just how can we rip this off. Spoiler alert. That's what happened with roller boogie, disco, a lot of other things in history. I think it's just, anytime you can show these people in their element as they are, I think it's just really important to capture.
Yeah, I should say that there were many roller boogie movies. I mean, including the one that was just called Roller Boogie. And even as part of my research for this and for an episode that we're doing later on in this month, Superfly, there was a movie, I think it was directed by Sig Shore and definitely produced by him, called That's the Way of the World. And it was kind of a vehicle for Earth, Wind, and Fire, but there's a great roller boogie scene that happens in that movie, and that was more to the side of it. It wasn't necessarily at the front and center, and that was 74, I want to say. So roller boogie as kind of an extension of disco had been around for a while, but roller skating and dancing, I mean, that was a very popular American thing from, at least the 19...
Now you're testing me, but I know that roller skating goes back really to early 20th century.
Right.
And we would be remiss not to mention Xanadu.
Oh, hell yes.
Yeah, Xanadu, Roller Boogie, Skate Town, USA, all a little bit whiter.
Right, exactly. Like, again, we're talking about how it sort of was kind of maybe a big culture unto itself in its own era. But it is like, it's sort of an odd thing to try and represent, because it's such a, I guess in like modern vernacular, it seems a little bit dated, like it seems a little bit dated to be on roller skates. And so to try and sort of emulate and show like the real emotion behind that, and how it's not just some like kind of silly expression, but it comes from a very genuine place of sort of self-creation and actualization. It was really like, I think, at least for me, what I was interested in portraying in my documentary.
Where can folks go to see your movie?
I mean, I just have it right now open on Vimeo. I have a website, yearofthedogfilms.com, and it's on there also.
Well, I will be sure to put that in the show notes for today's episode, because I really hope that more people get to see that, and I hope they get to see Get Rollin' as well, because I think that despite, we kind of ragged on some of the non-documentary parts of it, but I think it's still really worthwhile to check out, especially as a time capsule of that era, just to see New York at the time, to see the roller boogie scene, and to get introduced to these people that are very compelling. And I did want to mention one thing I forgot, which was that, speaking of Vinzerrelli, he seems to have made a record right around this time as well, which was on the Panbro label. I can only assume that it's the same Vinzerrelli, because the name of the song is Skate Dancer, and it is a 12-inch Panbro record from 1980, so I assume it's got to be the same guy. All right, we're going to take a break and play a preview for next week's show.
Trouble is here. He wears $600 suit, drives a $10,000 car, and he carries 2 guns. One to stop trouble and one to make trouble.
Oh, I come apart, but now cool.
He was born in the ghetto.
I didn't make it, baby, playing by the rules.
Raised in the streets.
I come apart, baby, but now I'm fine.
Trouble is this man's name.
Checking trouble, sugar, moving down the line.
Trouble man.
Ain't gonna let it sweat me, baby.
If you're looking for trouble, look out, 'cause trouble is here. Robert Hooks is Trouble Man. You jive him, and he'll wash you away. Trouble Man from 20th Century Fox. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parents. Trouble Man with an original Marvin Gaye score.
That's right. We'll be back next week with a look at Ivan Dixon's Trouble Man. Until then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Leon and Benjamin. So, Leon, what's been keeping you busy lately, sir?
Well, I put out my roller derby documentary, Suzy Hotrod, Roller Derby Star. That is currently available for free on YouTube at the Character NYC channel, or just search YouTube for Suzy Hotrod. I'm currently neck deep in footage for my next documentary, which is about a local bar in Brooklyn that closed down after being in the same location for about 100 years. I'll keep you posted on that. I also just want to mention a couple things for people who might be interested in the roller boogie scene, past or present. There's a really good site called skategroove.com. They have something called the National African American Roller Skating Archives Project, where they're actually collecting, I assume, memorabilia and whatever else they can get. So if anybody's interested in seeing that or contributing, check that out. And also, if you're on YouTube, there's a channel called Get Your Skate On, and skate is spelled SK8, number 8 on. I'm sure Mike can give you the link. They are currently keeping up with the scene in multiple cities, and they tend to collect some pretty great footage. You can also, I believe Kappa Chris is on there. You can find some of his really great stuff from the 80s, or I'm sorry, from the early 2000s as well.
And Benjamin, what has been keeping you busy lately too?
On the Rink is just kind of wrapping up somewhat of a festival run. So it's going to be playing in Miami in March, and then back here in Chicago, I think, in September. So I've been doing a bit of traveling with that. And while I'm not doing that, I'm currently in post-production with a film that I shot last August in Cuba. I shot a film there with some musicians who do traditional Cuban folklore. So similar to On the Rink, where I'm kind of just getting into the individual quotidian lives of the band members and then highlighting some of their performances. So that was a project that I shot all on 16 millimeter film, and so I'm right now in the edit bay with it all.
Wow, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I've been really happy with the footage so far. I mean, it looks beautiful. The performances are spectacular. The music's just very, very beautiful. And, you know, editing is always, I think, the most prolonged process, particularly for documentary films.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks again for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Please head on over to the website projection-booth.com where you can find out more about today's episode. You also find links over to iTunes where you can rate and review the show, and to Patreon where you can make a donation to the show. Donors get early access to every episode as long as I'm not running late. Every donation and every rating we get helps the Projection Booth take over the world.
let's go hit his way. Boy rules blunt rack to his boys. Erection brings bad boy joys. Boy thinks of that big fat back. Big black fat, left big black fat. Girl calls boy to stand him up on Saturday. Saturday is the Saturday, it's a Saturday, it's a Saturday. Saturday is the Saturday, Saturday is the Saturday.
Back once more with the wallop in the score. Smash about a riff shit and make you rock your hip. Revival of the roller boogie in the Rink and shit to make you think about the time we spoke fun instead of fight. From a piece of metal, yo, slip your butt to the fix of this mix. Toss that briefcase, it's time to let loose. Cause you work like heck to get the weekend check. So unfasten that sleeper on your neck. Connected like a vibe from the wheel to the foot. Come on everybody, this the funky output.
5 days you work, 1 whole day to play. Come on everybody, wear your roller skates today. It's Saturday, 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 it's Saturday, Saturday, it's Saturday, Saturday, it's Saturday, yeah.
Now as you pump your fists, I reminisce to a bounce rock skate roll fest to impress. Hey pretty diamond, do you like the way I'm dressed? Cool, keep the faith and be my mate, cause all we need is feet. But promote the hustle cause it keeps me thin. No need to talk, look who just walked in. Is there a gun on skate? Yes, man. So kick the wham on this jam. Oh, Mr. Sprinkler, Mr. Sprinkler. Wet me for one, Mr. Sprinkler. I'm heating high five and a day's no split. With a yawn, I trip to the dawn. Out comes the bodies following the one idea. It's clear. Rattle to the roll. Hold back up the track, grab your roller skates, y'all. And let's zip on by. Zippity doo, now let's zip on by. Feed on the weed and we're feeling high. Sun is on thick and the cheese is golden thick. Come on, it's no time to hide. Season is twist, spinning and winning. No hack and sack, let me in. Spill on the bottom away, but it's okay. It's a Saturday. Now let's all get baked like Anita.
Watch Mr. Lawn, don't look at the Peter.
Feel on the farm, I'll feel on the...
Hey, watch that.
It's a Saturday.
Now is the time to act the fool tonight. Forget about your worries and you will be alright. It's Saturday, 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 it's Saturday, Saturday, it's Saturday, Saturday, it's Saturday,
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.